definitely got passes and tried to finish when I wasn't expecting to get the ball. So like now it's like, okay, every cut I have, every cut I make, every fast break I run, like I have a real opportunity to get the ball, which definitely like took me a second. And I think it really just took one of those to really get my head around like, oh, she's all the way down at the other end of the floor and she could still make the pass to me down at the block at this end. So, I mean, it's been...
The tales that don't make the news are sometimes the most significant. The sideline blow-ups are something you've heard about. You've heard about the clipboard smashes, the early benchings, and the post-game press conferences where Caitlin Clark carefully considered every word like a tightrope walker. You've heard about the 5-player uprising, the power battle, and the tension in the locker room. However, there is a story within that story that has not yet been fully revealed. A tale about a gamer getting silently removed. One lost rotation position at a moment, the player's career was slipping away from her as she entered the 2026 season. A player who ought not to be in Indiana at all. With the exception of one individual who wouldn't let her leave. Lexie Hull is that player. Caitlin Clark is that individual. We are assembling the entire picture for the first time today. Because Hull's account of what happened to her and Clark's response to it is more than just a heartwarming tale of redemption. It provides a glimpse of the most sinister aspect of the dysfunction caused by Indiana fever. Additionally, it provides all the information you require regarding the true leaders within that franchise. The start of the season. It sounds like a player thinking about development, perseverance, and having faith in the process, but pay attention to what is beneath that statement. Playing time that appeared different between the beginning and the conclusion. She had to trust this procedure in situations that she is being extremely careful not to describe. A self-confidence that only makes sense if what she went through was actually challenging, rather than merely the typical transitional phase that an NBA player goes through to establish her feet. We're going to give the whole story of what Lexie Hull actually went through this season, which is deeper than she is revealing in public. Minutes into the game, Stephanie White benched her 3 mother effing, and the game was over. Caitlin Clark is the subject of this video. However, from the beginning of this season, Lexie Hull was subject to the same energy and concept of control through early benchings and exercising power over players by limiting their floor time. However, Hull lacked Clark's star power to keep her safe. She was merely attempting to survive as a role player. Lexie Hull describes how she was rescued from Stephanie White by Caitlin Clark. Nobody is connecting with Stephanie's desire to ruin her career and force her to leave Indiana. This isn't simply a story of redemption, it's proof of a toxic coaching culture where a Stanford champion, a former 6th overall draft pick, and a guy with a respectable professional background were routinely driven out. A teammate's refusal to allow it to occur was the only thing that prevented it. As we continue, this story becomes more complex, intimate, and devastating. Stay with me. You must comprehend Lexie Hull in order to appreciate the gravity of what she endured. Because a marginal player who is having difficulty staying in the league is not the subject of this story. This is the tale of a footballer who, while having every reason to believe they would be appreciated, discovered the hard way that their expectations were meaningless. Incorrect organization. Hull's own statements and reports on the internal fever dynamic paint an image of a player who was subjected to precisely that kind of slow-motion crush. Minutes vanishing for no apparent reason. Practice time does not translate into a chance to play. A coaching staff that appeared to have already made a decision regarding her future that was unrelated to her performance on the court. My playing time at the start of the season was clearly different from what it was at the conclusion. I had faith that I would remain prepared and work hard so that I could make the most of my court time. Pay close attention to what she is saying. She is pleased with herself for having faith in the procedure. Not for the coaching staff to properly handle her. Not because the organization had faith in her. She is pleased with herself for making it through a procedure that she obviously found really difficult. However, this is the crucial query. Why did she have to endure it in the first place? Why was a player with a respectable professional career who was selected 6th overall put in a position where survival was more important than development? The Hull condition is not isolated. It falls into a larger pattern of Stephanie White utilizing roster management as a tool of authority, making choices about playing time that appeared to be more intended to demonstrate the coaching staff's control over the roster than to maximize the team's ability to compete. Minutes into the game, Stephanie White benched her 3 mother effing, and the game was over. The same impulse that led White to remove the team's most crucial player, Caitlin Clark, from the floor 3. At the beginning of the season, Hull won a game just minutes in. The claim that no player, regardless of skill or ability, functions beyond the parameters set by the coaching staff is known as control authority. All of stuff was done by her. However, she also went above and beyond what was required of a franchise player and into the realm of true leadership, something that no one had explicitly asked her to do. After observing what was occurring to Lexie Hull in the locker room, she made the decision to stop it. In this scenario, there is a Caitlin Clark who decides to concentrate solely on herself. Her own performance, her own stats, and her own rapport with the coaches. The franchise player is her. She has enough difficulties of her own to deal with. Nobody would hold it against her for handling her own career and keeping her head down. She didn't do that. By all accounts, Clark made a conscious decision to invest in Lexie Hull's practice, floor, and locker room culture. One of the most straightforward ways a professional athlete may invest in another is by pushing her competitively. She produced offensive looks for her, so Clark had to enlarge her already wide field to cover not only the obvious reads but also the areas where Hull could flourish. Additionally, she refused to allow the coaching staff's devaluation of Hull to go unchallenged in the ways that a player of Clark's caliber could retaliate by highlighting Hull's contributions, setting up circumstances in which Hull's worth was evident, and making sure that those in charge of rotations could not legitimately look at the tape and claim that Hull was not contributing.
It's really fun because they garner so much attention, obviously, from the other team's defense, so then it allows the other players, me included, to make
passes she didn't believe were feasible. Consider what it would be like for a professional basketball player to see a teammate make a pass and think, "I have never seen that before." The ability to thread a pass into a space that the defense does not believe exists requires accuracy, timing, and vision. This type of playmaking goes beyond simply scoring points. Everyone on the court has opportunities as a result. For Lexie Hull, such passes were lifelines rather than merely stat sheet assists. It was evidence that Hull belonged on the floor, evidence that boosted confidence, and evidence that the coaching staff would have found extremely difficult to refute each time Clark found her in a position to succeed, in a spot where the defense had collapsed to account for Clark's gravity, leaving Hull open. You must comprehend what it means to play with a player who commands the level of defensive attention Clark creates on every possession if you want to really appreciate what Clark accomplished for Hull. Every defender in the building is focused on Caitlin Clark when she has the ball. Help defenders move, rotations change, and the opposing team's entire defensive system rearranges itself around the single objective of keeping Clark from causing harm. This is not hyperbole. Rather, it is a quantifiable fact of how WNBA defenses have prepared for this season's fever. For Lexie Hull, that translates to space. Because the defense is too preoccupied with Clark to close out, cuts end up in open gaps. Screens that, because the defending focus is elsewhere, provide separation. Because no defense had previously left those spots open for Hull, she was able to take advantage of catch-and-shoot situations. Clark showed up. They attract a lot of attention. Hull is describing a particular phenomenon, the gravitational pull of Caitlin Clark's presence and the downstream effect it has on every other player in the Fever offense, but she is being liberal with the plural. These advances are not coincidental. Hull is now making cuts, finding gaps, and converting chances. They are the direct outcome of playing with someone who demands so much defensive attention that the maths just works in everyone else's favor. This was generated by Caitlin Clark's individual brilliance, not by Stephanie White or the coaching staff, and it was made possible by Lexie Hull's willingness to trust the process long enough to get to this point. Let's discuss the actual on-court turnaround. Because Lexie Hull's season is a basketball story with quantifiable documented evidence of what happens when a gifted athlete has the chance to play with the proper teammate, it is more than just an emotional tale. The story is clearly told by contrasting Hull's performance in the early and late seasons. As her confidence returned and her shot selection improved, her shooting percentage increased. As she established herself in the rotation, her defensive contributions grew more reliable. As she internalized the patterns Clark's presence produced, her off-ball movement became more precise and decisive. These are not the numbers of a player who will always bounce back, no matter what. These are the figures of a player who is going through a breakdown and has since discovered a reason to have faith in herself once more. Confidence is not a soft concept in the world of professional basketball. It is a performance variable that directly and quantifiably affects every facet of a player's game. When a player lacks confidence, they pause when making a shot. They doubt what they've read. They make judgments and make cuts more slowly. They play fearfully, which is the quickest path in a professional league. Irrelevance at the start of the season, Lexie Hull was reportedly playing terrified. How could she? The coaching staff signals made it very evident that her future at Indiana was uncertain, that she was on the outside looking in, and that rotation decisions had already been decided regardless of what she did on the practice floor. That apprehension started to fade as soon as Clark started giving her chances, and Hull had proof that someone genuinely valued her presence on the floor. And the player you saw at Stanford starts to reappear when the fear subsides. According to numerous sources, Caitlin Clark developed a practice culture that was revolutionary for the entire team, but especially for players like Hull who needed to regain their competitive advantage. In practice, Clark doesn't go through the motions. Every session she leads is marked by an intensity and standard that compels everyone around her to rise to the occasion. Hull needed to be challenged to compete at a level she had never been challenged to achieve, be held to a higher standard, and be pushed by a player of Clark's caliber in practice in order to rediscover her identity as a player. Hull was able to demonstrate her worth to both herself and the coaching staff on the practice floor. That self-proofing is priceless. The game slows down and the choices become clearer if a player is certain they can compete at a high level, has the muscle memory of doing it consistently, and has the confidence that comes from repetition at the proper intensity. The body doesn't hesitate as it moves. Lexie Hull made the most of the surroundings that Caitlin Clark provided. Take a time to zoom out of the each narrative. Because Lexie Hull is not alone in her predicament. It is a case study of the larger dysfunction of the Indiana Fever under Stephanie White, and what it shows about the organizational culture is that one of a head coach's primary duties is to develop the players on her squad. Not just the celebrities, not just the athletes she personally enjoys or who neatly fit into her ideal system. All of them. Every player who regularly attends that practice facility should receive coaching aimed at improving them and maximizing their contributions to both the team and the sport. Development is the exact reverse of what is said to have happened to Lexie Hull. She was controlled down rather than tutored up. She was forced out of the rotation by decisions that favored the preferences of the coaching staff rather than the interests of the players or the team, rather than having her role explained and enlarged once she demonstrated her worth. This is a basic, fundamental coaching mistake, and the fact that a teammate's intervention, rather than the coaching staff's, was necessary to undo it is a critique of the entire Indianapolis system that Stephanie White has established. The Indiana Fever front office should be up at night thinking about this subject. Given that Lexie Hull, a 6th overall choice with a proven track record, experienced this, what is going on? Players at the bottom of the rotation. Players without Hull's history are even more susceptible to the gradual marginalization of coaching since they cannot depend on being viewed as a known commodity. There is debt on the Fever roster. It possesses talent that was gathered at a high organizational expense. Additionally, the potential that has been amassed is being systematically wasted if the coaching culture is one in which players are nurtured as human athletes rather than as tools of the head coach's authority. Not just Caitlin Clark, not just Lexie Hull. All of the players in that locker room are part of a culture that prioritizes control over development, based on the evidence that is currently available. Additionally, such culture has a huge cumulative cost in terms of player performance, roster cohesiveness, and organizational trajectory. Not enough attention is paid to the secondary impact of what occurred to Hull. When players witness a teammate receiving treatment similar to what Hull was purportedly subjected to, it sends a message to the entire locker room when they witness someone with respectable qualifications and professional value being squeezed out through coaching choices that seem intended to undermine rather than enhance. The message is that you might experience this. The coaching staff can do this to anyone if they can do it to a 6th overall choice. Furthermore, neither professional urgency nor